So love. Love has many definitions, and there are many concepts of love. We can talk about family love. We can talk about brotherly love. We can talk about erotic love. We can talk about charity or selfless love. Basically, the four categories in the West that we understand love to be. And as many different definitions or understandings of what love is, I mean, if you think about it, dude, I love that car. Or, oh, I really love her. She's hot. Or, man, I would love to tell you this story because of the profound impact it had. When my first son was born, I had this experience of love, unselfish, unspeakable love I could not put into words. Do you see all the different? We could do the very same thing with God. I used to do this when I was teaching at university. I would say, everybody, close your eyes and picture. I'm going to give you a sound image because every word, such as love, every sound image is made up of two major components. A sound image, like dog, D-O-G, that's a sound image. And then an actual object that you associate with that sound image, okay? So if we all closed our eyes and I said, okay, ready? I'm going to give you a sound image. Dog. Now, what object do you picture? And some of you might picture a German Shepherd. Some of you might picture a Chihuahua, a lab. We had a golden doodle. It goes on and on and on. You understand. And so it is with terms like love and like God. And so this is the fourth Sunday. And the fourth Sunday, we're talking about love. And of course, the Bible tells us that God is love. Whatever that means. After I had been a pastor for like 20 years or so, I went back to university. And I went to a secular university. And I did an undergraduate in philosophy and literature. It was the University of Victoria on the island of Vancouver Island in British Columbia, really well known for their literary program. So it was really an interesting journey after being a pastor for 20-some years to go back and take an undergraduate in philosophy at a secular university. And of course, you can imagine, and this particular university was pretty anti-God. Mm-hmm. I remember my philosophy teacher in the first year going, oh yeah, so where did that come from? Well, where did the planets come from? Well, they can't, where did the Big Bang come from? And people say, God. Well, maybe it just came from the universe or something. That kind of an arrogant attitude, very anti-God. Anyway, in that environment, it was interesting to journey with fellow students and all different opinions, multi-religious, agnostic, atheist, and would go out to the pub afterwards, we'd be discussing classes and And people, oh, I don't believe in God. And are you telling me God, more killing and death has occurred in our world in the name of God than any other reason. And this is the God you want me to believe in? Valid arguments. And I could say, yeah, you know what, you're right. And actually, that was at the time back in the day. Anybody here know Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens? The two of the four great horsemen of the new atheism, which was being proposed at the time. And these were the intellectual giants and the avant-garde, and they are dismissing all this religious silliness in the name of reason and intelligence. But anyway, people would be going on and quoting them and saying that's why they don't believe in God. And when I would say, well, just who is this God? And I would hear the descriptions that they gave, I would say, well, man, I absolutely, totally agree with you. I don't believe in that God either. Why would anybody believe in a God like that? And so, as this Christmas season approaches us, and as we've gone through the first 4 Sundays of Advent, and get ready for the 5th one, Larry, we do consider this question because it matters to us. I would say to those people when they would be arguing that way, and I'd say, okay, but answer me this question. One question: do you want to be loved? Never in my life have I met a person when I ask that question say, oh, are you kidding me? I don't want to be loved. Every single human being I know who's honest with themselves wants to be loved. Well, what if love is God? What if love is God? Two weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, why would love matter? Why love? I gave you a statistic, a current statistic in the USA from a psychiatrist who does cutting-edge research, who travels the United States of America doing interviews, and he came back from his research and studies to have discovered that 57% of all females under the age of 20 have contemplated suicide. 57%. Why? Why? I'm not going to answer that question. Ask yourself that question. Why? So, for me, this statistic is very poignant because I also have a part-time counseling ministry. And one of the things I do is I meet bi-weekly with a group of ladies, international ladies, who have lost either a husband or a child to suicide. So it's one thing for me to hear statistics that 57% of females in America under the age of 20 have contemplated suicide. 30-some% have attempted, and 20% or so have actually succeeded. But when you hear the stories, those are numbers and those are statistics, and they're astonishing. But when you hear the stories of people and you look in their faces. And so we were talking, I have this eclectic group, and I've been asked to come on kind of as the spiritual advisor, counselor to this group who are in grief recovery. And I have agnostics, I have atheists, I have practicing Jewish people, I have Catholics, I have Protestants, and somehow I have to bring spirituality to the table in a palatable way to this eclectic group of really hurting people. And so we were talking this last week about love and the ache of the soul for love, and that if the soul cannot find that love in which to be satisfied, the consequences can be dire. Okay, I say this to you, you're sitting in a comfortable church, it's warm, maybe you're thinking about football. Did anybody watch the Bears game last night? Woo, who can believe that? I don't know how many times we kept saying, you know what, this looks hopeless. Oh, should we just go to bed? We got to get up. But somehow we stayed, and somehow, can you believe they won that game? Wow, that was crazy. So it's easy for us to sit in a church the following morning, having been, I think I didn't go to bed till 1:30. And it's warm and it's comfortable, and I'm telling you statistics, and we're talking about actually the meaning of the universe, people. It's just so easy to think, oh, yeah, oh, God, 57%? Wow, that's too bad. Well, I hope their government's doing something about that. What that statistic reflects to us is the reality of the need of the human heart. The inescapable reality of the need of the human heart to know unbreakable, unconditional love that meets you in those deepest longings that maybe you can't even articulate. You don't even know how to put into words, but they ache and they pound. And they're there, and you can't escape them. And so I was talking to them about that, and one mother said to me, she said, I'm sorry, but I just can't buy what you're saying. I loved my daughter with every ounce of my being that I had, and she still, at age 16, took her life. I don't believe that love is enough. So we have a quandary. Is love enough? Why did this 16-year-old girl take her life? Her mom absolutely loved her with every ounce of her being. So we can ask that question to ourselves, is love enough for me? And what I'd like to propose to you is that love is enough. But we often don't know how to let it be enough. Love is enough. But we often don't know how to let it be enough. And so we have our scripture as we read this morning. You know the story. It's a familiar story. It's been prophesied. We read Isaiah, which is 700 years before Christ shows up. And a virgin's going to have a son, and then it actually happens. And we don't have time to talk about how ridiculous that must have sounded to Joseph. He's betrothed, which in those days was like you were married, and Mary has to come to him and say, Joseph, I'm sorry, but I'm pregnant. And he's like, oh, great. Who is it? If your fiance came to you and said, honey, I'm sorry, but I'm pregnant? I mean, wouldn't you ask the question, who is it? And what's her answer? God. We've read the story so many times, we've lost touch with the shocking ridiculousness of that answer. God impregnated you? But here's the thing. Under the Jewish law, of which Joseph was a righteous man, Deuteronomy 22:22 says, if a man is sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge this sin from Israel. Now imagine somebody comes to you and tells you that they've cheated on you, they've been unfaithful, and that they're pregnant, and under the law you have every right to have them stoned to death. That was the law. And you're angry. Why would God show up this way in this mess? What does he want us to get? But Joseph doesn't do that. He chooses to, in mercy and grace, put Mary away privately. And then he has a dream from an angel saying, actually, you know what Mary is telling you is true. And you know what Joseph did? In the ridiculous of the mess, because he would suffer ridicule and prejudice for the rest of his earthly existence, his son would be called an illegitimate bastard and demon-possessed. His son Jesus. He would suffer shame for the rest of his life. But guess what Joseph dared to do? He dared to let love be enough. And he didn't put Mary away. He loved her, and he protected her. Do we think sometimes, how is it that love sometimes is not enough for us? Is it possible, do we think that the messes we've created are too big for God's love? There's a really beautiful movie made in the 80s, a British movie, called The Mission with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons. Has anybody ever seen that movie? A few people. It's based on a true story. And it won a number of awards. And it's filmed on location in South America with real indigenous people. And it takes place in about the mid-1700s. And in the mid-1700s, what was going on in Europe? Well, what was going on in Europe is that Portugal, Spain, and France were all fighting to have colonizing control to exploit the people of South America and Africa. And so the Spanish and the Portuguese are fighting because what was happening? They were going into these indigenous people, they were capturing them, they were bringing them back, and they were selling them as slaves. Okay? True story. And the story is about this man, Robert De Niro, who plays the part of Rodrigo. Rodrigo is a mercenary. He's trained to kill people. He's good at it. But he's also a slave trader, and he goes up into these places in the jungle, captures these indigenous people, and brings them back because slavery was still legal for the Portuguese, but not for the Spanish on paper. And the Portuguese would buy these slaves and then sell them to the Spanish under the table. It's a horrendous, ugly mess. And this guy, Rodrigo Mendoza, he would go in and kill those people, enslave those people, and sell those people. And while he was away on one of his trips, he came back, and you know what he found out? His wife was sleeping and in love with his younger brother. Well, guess what Rodrigo does? He kills his brother, and he goes to jail. He kills his brother, and he goes to jail. And he's hopeless. He's done with humanity. He's done with life. And he's sitting in pain in jail. And a Jesuit priest, Jeremy Irons, comes in and begins to confront him about his unwillingness to let God meet him in his pain and suffering with God's love. Finally, he convinces Rodrigo that there is a penance he can do so that he can know God's forgiveness. So Rodrigo says, there's no penance hard enough for me to do, for me to be forgiven for what I've done. Finally, he comes to settle on gathering all the helmets and armor that were used to enslave and kill and sell these people, these indigenous people, and that he would go back into the tribe and serve them. And so he has to carry behind him this huge net of all their armor, which was a burden that he kept carrying and carrying and pulling, and they've got to climb a waterfall, and they've got to go into these jungle ditches, and it's hard enough just for people without a burden to carry. And here he is carrying that burden. And a lot of times he drops it, he goes back and he gets it. He cannot let go of his burden. That's the metaphor, okay? Get this. He cannot let go of his burden. And the question is there a burden that you're carrying this morning? Is there a burden you're carrying this morning? Is there something about yourself that you just can't seem to let go of and forgive yourself? It's so beautifully depicted in the movie because he can't do it. And so finally he gets into the jungle to those people. He gets there. And the chief of the people who he's been exploiting sees him as he stumbles over this ledge, and the priest, the chief of the people, runs to him with a knife and grabs his hair, and he's holding the knife at his throat, knowing this is the man who's killed his people and enslaved. And then the chief takes the knife. Instead of slitting his throat, he slits the rope that's tied to the burden that represents the death of his own people, and frees the murderer from the burden of the atrocities he's committed. And then Rodrigo can let himself be forgiven and let himself be loved. So what is it that keeps you from being totally loved? Just as you are this morning. What is the burden that you can't let go of? We're almost done. Bernard of Clairvaux was an abbot in the 11th century. And he wrote a book on the 4 stages of love. We all go through the first couple. Love begins by love of self for self's sake. And that's a good thing. If you didn't love yourself for your own sake, you might commit suicide. Or you might be a psychopath. You might be a serial killer. So the first step in love is loving ourselves for our own sake, which is a good thing. The second step in love, says Bernard, is to love God for self's sake. In loving myself, learning to love myself, I learn who this God is who absolutely loves and forgives me and who can actually meet me in my pain and give me strength. And so I start to love God for what he can give me, what he can do for me, and what difference God can make in my life. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Because I don't have the power to forgive myself, but God can give me that power. And I start to love God for the power and the grace he gives me. The third step is that I grow to love God for God's sake. I begin to just see how beautiful this God is. And I just love God for God. That's a deep state. I don't know how many people get there. But the fourth state, I think even less and fewer people get there. And that is to love ourselves for God's sake. God loves you perfectly and unconditionally. So I was sitting yesterday morning and I was praying about some of these things. And what does that look like? To accept myself with all my imperfections. And to accept, not just acknowledge, to accept that I will always be imperfect. And yet, let myself be perfectly loved in all my imperfections. Is to love myself for God's sake and to go softly on this earth. For he has shown you what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Love, the gift you let yourself have. As the Father has loved me, even so love I you. Abide, rest, let yourself have. How much love? As the Father has loved me. How much did the Father love Jesus? To accept myself with all my imperfections, and to accept, not just acknowledge, that I will always be imperfect. To accept on this world, I will always be imperfect. And yet let myself be perfectly loved in all my imperfections. is to love myself for God's sake and go softly on this earth. Love. I didn't say love the gift you give yourself. Because you don't have unconditional love to give yourself. The love you need has to be bigger than you. It's good to love yourself. Jesus even said so. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's good to love yourself. But this love that we're talking about, it's not a gift you give yourself. It's a gift you let yourself have. And that is the true gift of Christmas. That's why Jesus was born in a palace. He was born to a lady who they would say was an adulteress. In the poor side of town, in a mess, in a barn, in a manger. Because that's where love you let yourself have is waiting to be born, right there in the mess of our lives, in the manger of our hearts. That's the love of God that conquers the world. Love, the gift you let yourself have. One little gift of love I let myself have was this. It's from Lucas. We don't have a single ornament this year except this one. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for loving me. I love you. Stand with me if you wish to, and let us proclaim the Apostles' Creed, which reflects on the God of love, who loves absolutely.